Galatians chapter 6. As we head down the home stretch, Lord willing, we have tonight and next Wednesday night. So consider that my Christmas present to you, finishing right before Christmas. So Merry Christmas to you all. And we're going to be in Galatians 6, 1 to 10 tonight. And we're going to be talking about meeting some needs. And in this section we're going to deal with this evening, Paul's going to talk about some things that are probably personal to us. We're going to be talking about, number one, the idea of what do we do for a brother or sister that has fallen into sin. And then we're going to be talking about some of our financial responsibilities. That is supporting those who are in ministry, preaching, teaching. And then we're going to talk about doing good to all men, which is very much a Christmassy kind of idea. And so tonight we're going to look at verses 1 to 10. Let's begin. I'm going to read chapter 6, 1 to 5. Chapter 6, 1 to 5. Here's what it says. Brethren, even if a man is caught in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, each one looking to himself, lest he too be tempted. Bear one another's burdens, and thus fulfill the law of Christ. If anyone thinks he is something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. But let each one examine his own work, and then he will have reason for boasting in regard to himself alone, and not in regard to another. For each one shall bear his own load. Okay? So, what are we going to do when a brother falls into sin? And that's what he's going to deal with first. And I want to talk about the restoration movement. I'm a big fan of the restoration movement. Amen. And I believe still in its mission. And a big fan into seeing some of those principles come to light again. However, what we're talking about here is a different type of restoring people. And so he says in these early verses, if anyone is caught in a trespass, sin. Now, we've all heard some of the big stories. You know, you turn your TV on and maybe it's some famous TV preacher that gets caught doing something he ought not to be doing. And even in our own brotherhood, again, there's times that leaders fall. But it's not just the leaders. There's time when the rest of us may fall into a sin as well. And we talked about last week, our goal in life is that we don't sin, right? Our goal is that we would live such a life that's pleasing to God, we wouldn't have these kind of problems. But what we're saying here is that sadly, sins will happen even after conversion. And I wish. And once I became a Christian, I would never sin again. Wouldn't that be nice? Wow. Never do anything I didn't need to do, never say anything. But sadly, we all know we've said things we shouldn't have said and done things we shouldn't have done. And so, what do we do when someone who is a Christian falls into sin? And that's what he's going to be talking about here. John put it this way in 1 John 2, I am writing to you that you may not sin. That's our goal there. But, he says, if anyone does sin, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus, the righteous one. And in 1 John chapter 1 and verse 9, that's where he says, if we confess our what?
Sins.
Our sins. He's faithful in order to forgive us our sins.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, we've said before that being saved by grace is not an excuse or a license to sin, but it ought to rather motivate us to live a holy life. But sadly, sometimes we fall. Sometimes we do things we ought not to do. And so Paul is addressing the church leaders here. What do you do when a brother falls into sin? Well, number one, let's recognize that sins and shortcomings are going to happen. It's just kind of naive, I think, to believe that everyone's going to be perfect all the time. You know, it would be nice, but on the other hand, we know that Satan is still at work, right? Still the roaring lion seeking someone to devour. And still out there disguising himself as a what?
As an angel of light.
As an angel of light, making that which is bad look good. So Satan's on the job, and sometimes he catches us at a weak moment. Or sometimes he just gets us to rebel and do the things we ought not to do. And so for leaders here, we need to realize that we have a responsibility to help the weak. That is, after all, what Paul told the elders at Ephesus. You read about it in Acts chapter 20. It says, be on guard for yourself and the flock. That is because Paul says savage wolves are going to come in. And so, moms and dads, did you just give up on your kids the first time they disobeyed? First time they told a lie? First time they did something wrong? Of course not. Now you might have disciplined them a little bit, might have got after them, but you affirmed that you still loved them and you reminded them what they needed to do, and that you still had high hopes for one. Paul says to restore such a one. Have you ever done a restoration of furniture, restoration of old cars, old furniture? What do you do when you restore it?
Make it look new.
Put it back in its original condition.
Say that again, Glenn?
Put it back in its original condition.
Yeah, and sometimes with furniture you have to get through a whole lot of layers of paint. You ever stripped the paint off an old dresser? One after another after another. Or have you ever gone into a house and it's got 6 different layers of wallpaper on it? And you want to see, well, what's behind those walls? And so to restore it, to get it back to the way it needs to be. Jesus demonstrated restoration, didn't he? To that woman caught in adultery. To that little wee man by the name of Zacchaeus.
Even with Peter.
To Peter, after he denied him. Is another very good example. I want someone to turn to Matthew chapter 4, 18 to 22, and read those 5 verses for me. Matthew chapter 4, verses 18 to 22.
Go ahead.
And
Jesus, walking by the Sea of Galilee, saw 2 brethren, Simon Peter and Andrew his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishers. And he said to them, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. And they straightway left their nets and followed him, and going from thence he saw 2 other brethren, James the son of Zebedee, and John his brother, in a ship with Zebedee their father, mending their nets. And he called them, and immediately they left the ship and their father and followed him.
All right, I think now, what in the world does this passage have to do with what I'm talking about? Well, it's something really neat here, and it is the term mending the nets. What occupation did Peter, Andrew, James, and John do? What was their job?
Fishermen.
They were fishermen. They knew something about nets, didn't they? Okay? And so every night they'd be out there in the Sea of Galilee fishing, and I've never seen the Sea of Galilee, but I imagine there are some rocks in there, some stumps in there, and just things had a way of happening that would put holes in the net. Now you don't have to be a fisherman to know this. How good is a hole with a net, or is a net with a hole in it?
Not very good.
Not too good, right?
No.
And so they would mend the nets. They'd repair them. Years ago when I lived in Elizabeth City, North Carolina, we had a neighbor, a Vietnamese guy who was a fisherman. And he would actually stretch his nets out, long, and he would mend them. Now, here's the point. Once Peter, Andrew, James, and John mended their nets, what did they do with that net?
Took it back out fish?
You mean they didn't just throw it away because it was no good?
No.
They didn't just put it on a shelf never to be used again?
Right.
No.
Once the net was mended, it was useful for service again.
Like Glenn.
Now, I know this isn't Greek class here, but the very same word for mending in this text is the same word that Paul uses for you who are spiritual. Restore such a one. It's a great word study. They mended the nets and they used them. Now, sometimes, someone falls into sin. They'll never be good for anything. You can go sit in the back row, but we'll never use you in any possible way.
You're divorced. You're no good.
Okay, and so, or you did something you shouldn't have done, whatever. And so the idea is, once somebody is restored, what?
They put back in service.
There should be a place for service for them again. And so once a net was mended, you use it. So our job then is to restore broken people. You know any broken people around you?
Someone in the mirror this morning.
And battered,
Lots of them.
had some rough times, maybe made some poor decisions, maybe lived a life of reckless abandon. You know, when they come to Christ, what does He do for them?
Well, most of the time,
Restores them.
He forgives them.
Most of the time, those people are a lot better off in terms of service than people that have been there a long time.
Could be. And so the idea is when the nets are mended, you use them. And so one of our responsibilities as Christian leaders is that if we are spiritual, we need to restore people. And sometimes, we don't like conflict. We don't like to confront people for their sins. I get that. That's not one of my favorite things either. But when you help somebody to change their ways, when you help somebody to get their life back in good order again, then you say there's a place of service for you. And then in this, now, sometimes it's good to pat, we want to pat ourselves on the back and say, I'm doing good. It's those guys, those people, that man, that woman, they've done bad. But Paul says something here at the end of verse 1 that we need to pay attention to. Watch yourself, lest you too be tempted. You ever said, that will never happen to me? I would never do that.
That's to deceive yourself.
That's definitely some deceiving yourself. Look, I got some scripture here. Let's what does Proverbs 16:18 say in 1 Corinthians 10:12?
Pride goes before destruction, the haughty spirit before a fall.
Pride goes before distraction, the haughty spirit. What about 1 Corinthians 10:12? Oh,
10:12. So if you think you are standing firm, be careful that you don't fall.
yeah. If you think you're standing, be careful so you don't fall. So a quick question. How would you want to be treated if you were caught in a sin like the woman caught in adultery? If it was you and the big light of exposure fell upon you, how would you want to be treated? Well, how many of you want to be stoned? So let's take that off the table. How many of you want to be condemned and shunned the rest of your life? So what do you want to have happen?
Be forgiven.
Compassion.
Some compassion, some forgiveness, some what?
Restoration.
Love and restoration. We may need that admonishment like Jesus gave that woman, go and
Sin no
sin
more.
no more. But He also said, I don't condemn you either.
Most people, what they want to do is run and hide, though, and not be around people and let them know what's going on.
Yeah,
Even though some of them might even know.
yeah, and that's true. And sometimes the shame is so great, and the guilt is hard. Maybe others have forgiven you and you haven't forgiven yourself. And I think that is one of Satan's biggest weapons to use against us. To say, God could never love you after what you've done. Well, Jesus shows a lot of that kind of compassion. So Paul says, restore people. Use some compassion and use some love. And then be reminded that you need to watch yourself. I've known some preacher friends who would say things like, that would never happen to me, and lo and behold, it happened to them.
Wow.
Be careful what you say.
Yeah, absolutely. There but for the grace of God might be a good way to describe it. So, first thing we're going to do is we're going to recognize both the responsibility as well as the opportunity to help people who are in sin, who fall.
We had a fellow that years ago up in Elkhart, he always used the term God all the time in the wrong way, not even realizing that he was misusing that term.
Mm-hmm.
What did he say?
So one time I took
The
him.
name of God.
Use the name of God.
So one time I took him and I put my arm around his shoulder and I said, I want to talk to you. And do you realize that you're using the name of the Lord thy God in vain? I kind of smiled when I said it. And he said, what do you mean? And I think he did it because I received it, because I put my arm around his shoulder and kind of smiled at him as I said it. I think because of that, he received it.
Oh yeah, there's a right way to approach something, and then there's a wrong way to
Yep.
approach something. And the me big, you small is not going to work too well. And sometimes it's going to be something like, I'm not perfect, I have my problems, you probably know some of them, but here's something I want to just talk about a minute.
Amen.
And so it puts us as two brothers who are trying to encourage one another.
Right.
And so that's a good way to go. Other thoughts on restoring those who have fallen and looking to yourself?
I know a preacher had been out of the ministry for a number of years, and somebody called him and said, "Hey, I want you to come be my associate."
Okay, very good. Good way to get back in ministry.
Back to work.
Verse 6. Talk about supporting the ministry. Let the one who is taught the word share all good things with him who teaches. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. Whatever a man sows, this he will also reap. For the one who sows to his own flesh shall from the flesh reap corruption, but the one who sows to the Spirit shall from the Spirit reap eternal life. Supporting the ministry. Now again, this is kind of one of those touchy subjects, and I don't hear a whole lot of sermons preached on this particular text because you don't want to appear self-serving, you know.
Or greedy.
I knew a guy who basically said all preachers are stealers and liars, you know. And yet you hear these about these guys that live in the gigantic mansions, drive the Rolls Royce, and you know the fancy cars, and you think, why are they in the ministry? Back in again in North Carolina, there was a guy who a preacher that got into a whole lot of bad publicity because he had a doghouse that was air conditioned.
Oh,
Yeah.
Now,
God.
I have to be honest, and Mary, my dog has an air-conditioned house too. She just shares it with Mary and me, and so you know, it's she has a pretty cushy life, you know.
Yeah,
But there, you know, sometimes there's this aura that some are just in it for the ministry. You know, who was it? Creflo Dollar, that TV evangelist, for a while said he needed $65 million for a new Gulfstream jet. I guess the old personal jet wasn't good enough anymore, so he needed 65 mil for a brand new one.
Really?
Well, he did kind of back off that, but there you go.
Still
You never
preaching.
got it or you got it?
He's
He
still
did not get it.
preaching.
He did not get it, and he kind of backed it. He got so much bad publicity that he just... Oral Roberts, saying, you remember that name? Said if he didn't get 8 million, God was going to kill him.
Yep, yep.
Just think about that.
He used to preach
He
the
did.
world of heaven in
But he
87.
got it. He got money.
Yeah.
Right?
Let the one who is taught
Church, not for
share all good things with him who teaches. This is speaking to the congregation. This is teaching to the church to say those who are in ministry, they deserve. They're doing work. They deserve to be compensated for what they're doing. Now, this passage teaches the biblical truth of financially supporting gospel workers. And this is not just unique to the Apostle Paul. Some turn to Luke chapter 10, verse 7, and Matthew 10:10. Now, again, or Blair's just up here, whatever. Let's see what Jesus had to say about this. Luke 10:7. Help me out.
Okay, let's see. Stay in the house, eating and drinking whatever they give you, for the worker deserves his wages.
Jesus said the worker deserves what?
His wages.
Well, imagine that. The worker is deserving of wages. What about Matthew 10:10?
Take no bag for the journey, or extra tunic, or sandals, or a staff, for the worker is worth his keep.
Oh my goodness. So a couple different times Jesus would talk about this principle of the laborer being worthy of his hire. Well, let's see what else Paul had to say about this. Now, we're not going to read all of chapter 9, verses 1 to 14, but we certainly could. It fits into this context very well. But verse 14 says, so also the Lord directed those who proclaim the gospel to get their living from the gospel. And so it is a biblical principle that those who labor in ministry should receive compensation for the ministry they offer.
Now, this can refer to anyone, though, that works for the Lord Jesus and administers the Word of God. Doesn't necessarily mean a preacher, it means anybody.
Well, you know, we typically talk about missionaries. We talk about those
Yeah.
working in Bible colleges or whatever they're doing.
Gospel singers.
What's that?
Gospel singers.
Them too, you know.
Well, they're the ones that, they're the least.
But the idea is, and there's one more that's kind of, we don't talk about this one very much. Paul says, let the elder who rules well be worthy of double honor, especially those who work hard at preaching and teaching. And so this particular verse talks about those who are, there are some who are elders that may be secularly employed. But then there are some who are full-time in gospel work. And if you're doing full-time gospel work, you don't have time to go somewhere else and work. And so Paul says they're worthy of the double honor. What do you suppose the first honor for an elder might be?
Being an elder, in my mind.
Well, yeah, and the respect that
Respect
comes
for the-
along with it.
Yeah,
You are in a position of authority that should be esteemed, and you got to live a life that's worthy of course. And then the second honor, I think, would be the financial compensation for it. Okay, so let the elder who rules well be worthy of this. All right, any thoughts on this point? I mean, it's really hard to argue with this because, I mean, Jesus talked about it, Paul talked about it, and so it's not like, you can say, well, that we don't pay them, you ought to.
We all have different opinions about certain things regarding leadership. You and I would differ. Richard and I differ. Glenn and I differ about certain things in leadership. But to go into these things would take an infinite amount of time, But I think that we all leave our opinions to ourselves and just let them be, and not cause division because of your particular opinion about a certain thing.
Okay, I'm not following where
Well,
you're
in other words, I have a different idea about the preacherhood, about the eldership, and so on. But I don't want to go into that because it causes a lot of things. Just the idea that we all think differently about different things.
Well, and that is true. That is true. And so in matters of opinion, or where the Bible is silent, we might be able to, but this is not the Bible being silent. Jesus talked about it, Paul talked about it.
Okay, one area I know, one preacher, instead of tithing to his local church, he gives it to his favorite mission. He never gives a nickel to the local church.
Wow.
He gives it all to his favorite mission, which is a Bible college in another country. My frustration with that is the missions still get covered by the church, utilities still have to be paid for, the insurance has to be paid for, the other things. Folks say, well, I don't want a nickel towards supporting Glenn or Richard or Tim Tompkins, who are the preaching ministers and preaching elders of the congregation. Then fine, put your money toward Daily ministry or for India ministry or England ministry or Puerto Rico ministry or all the other ministries we have. But the bills still go on, whether folk and some folk will deliberately not give, figuring, okay, I got to bail out a family member that's in trouble, and the family member is always in trouble, and the church can just take the road and forget about it because we got other obligations. And that's an attitude that some have and some will not outgrow.
Right, that's true. And so the point for us is we will reap what we sow. Now, reaping and sowing, that sounds like a farmer kind of illustration. So let's use a farmer in a field. Let's say a farmer has a 40-acre piece of ground. But let's say he only plants 5 acres of it because it's hard work and he only wants to plant 5 acres of it. At the harvest time, how much return is he going to get?
As much as that 5 acres will yield.
About 5 acres, and he's going to miss out on about 35 acres of yield, isn't he?
Right.
And so, the biblical principle is, if we sow generously, we shall reap generously. If we sow sparingly, I'll use it selfishly, miserly, then we're going to reap what? The principle is that reaping is in proportion to our sowing.
Right.
Yes?
Okay, my son-in-law had a notion he was gonna go back to Missouri and farm 40 acres and support his family.
Oh, okay.
And reality is today, I mean, the old days, 40 acres and a mule, you could survive as far as the family is concerned. But today, to support you and your son-in-law and the 2 wives, you need 2,000 acres to support modestly, to survive in an Iowa farm or an Indiana farm or an Ohio farm. You can't do it on 40 anymore, but you could 100 years ago.
Yeah, times they are changing. Now, in the church, Paul is also, I think, teaching us that we will reap what we sow as well. And so, well, you know, if you ask people Sunday morning, how many of you want the church to grow? Every hand in the place is going to go up.
Hopefully.
I mean, that's just, yeah, we all want church to grow. Well, how many of you will, you talk about volunteer, and you'll see people disappear. How many of you will show up? No, I'm not going to do that. How many of you will give? Don't you talk to me about giving. You know, and you know, people get really bent out of shape. You know, if you say, we want you to commit to something, or we want you to share in some way. And so maybe we wonder why the church doesn't grow, and maybe the answer is we are not sowing generously.
Right.
We're being selfish in some way here. And so Paul wants us to know that we're going to reap what we sow. And there is a good thing here. And this is an area where, sadly, I think a lot of people have gone off the deep end. God does promise to bless our giving. Do you believe that?
Yes.
Now, does that mean if I put $5 in the offering plate, I'm going to expect that God is somehow going to give me 50 by the end of the week?
No.
No.
You can think that.
What's that?
They
You can
could.
think that.
Well, sadly, that is the lie that is being told to countless people that tune in to TV preachers.
That's right.
Some TV preachers,
I
yeah.
heard I heard a preacher talk on that this morning. He said the very thing you're talking about.
Yeah. If you will show your faith to God by sending me the check, and God's going to bless you. Years ago, I made a call on a person, and she had visited a time or two, and went to just see her a little bit. And she says, "I pray with Pastor Bob every day." I said, "Well, what are you talking about? I'll show you." And so she disappeared to another room, and when she came back, she had a poster with Robert Tilton. How many of you remember that name? Robert Tilton, longtime famous TV preacher. And so every day there was like 7 little blocks, and then it said a faith day. And then up throughout the month, 7 faith day, 7. And so every day, and he was there and he's praying, and so you're supposed to put your hand on his hand, so you would be in agreement for your prayer. And you would pray for what you wanted, and on, what do you think you did on faith day?
Sent him money.
Sent him a check. And so at the end of every cycle of your faith, you demonstrated that you're ready to get this miracle from God because you sent, well, you know, the expose on him, I think 2020 did, they showed the post office and the dumpster with all kinds of envelopes with prayer requests, but the checks had mysteriously been taken out.
Wow.
Imagine that. And so that is the lie that a lot of these guys and ladies are telling on TV. It's the health and wealth gospel. That if we give, God is going to bless us back. If we give, now, lest I go too far in one direction, how many of you have ever actually seen God bless you in a tangible way for your faith?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. My story I'll tell here real quick. Many years ago, I had 2 children in diapers at the same time. And I was a lowly Bible college professor. And we moved to North Carolina, and we had 2 kids in diapers, and times were tough. And I had to count pennies to go into the grocery store to buy my kids diapers. And actually, because of tax, I was a few pennies short. And the cashier said, "Oh, don't worry about it." But I was mad. I was hot.
Yeah.
I was ready to quit. Didn't know why God sent me down here. It wasn't fair. I could be doing 100 other things, making a lot more money. I muttered and sputtered all the way home. And when I got home, on my back porch were 2 large baskets of produce. Corn, tomatoes, cucumbers, and then about then I feel this tall.
Yeah.
Because I had, been angry at God, and God had it covered all the time. And so the idea is, as we are faithful even in our giving. Now, that didn't mean I got a raise, I didn't get $1 million or anything like that, but God did meet our physical needs. And to this day, I have no idea who put that produce there, but it's the idea that as we are faithful to God, He's going to bless us in a way too. And so, but you'll never hear me say, I'll put 20 in the offering and this week God will give you 50.
No.
It is not a biblical teaching.
No.
But reaping is proportional to our sowing. And so I think in faith, we trust that God is going to meet our needs there. Any thoughts or sharing you have on that thought?
I opened up an envelope several times through the years and found a good bunch of money. And that wasn't even expected. I didn't expect it, didn't know, and sometimes didn't even know where it came from.
Yep.
I've had in Ypsilanti, Michigan, my pickup was broke down. I had an elder come over to the house and take me downtown and bought me a car.
Wow.
And give it to me. He said, you need that to get around with. Just bought it for me. And I've had that happen 2 or 3 times to me. And several other things through the years. Just give. Never expected anything.
Yeah.
And all you have to do is give up yourself to God.
Okay, Richard?
Well, my bitterness came in living in parsonages for about 11 or 12 years, 2 different churches. And when you live in a parsonage, if you should die, your wife's out on the street in 3 to 6 months. Seriously, I mean, there's the next preacher's moving in, and you're on the road. And I came down to Florida, and after being in the ministry for so many years, didn't start all over. They said, well, you don't qualify for a house because you changed occupations. And we were looking at a house over on Crystal Lake. We're going to build a house, and we didn't have the credit, all the other, the continuity of the job. And then it said you had to be at your current commission sales job for 2 years before you would be considered. And we ended up getting the house we're in was the identical floor pattern, reversed from the other one, but it was identical floor pattern reversed, same Stardust kind of home. It was $7,000 or $8,000, $10,000 cheaper.
Wow.
And it was right across the street from Sandpiper Golf and Country Club, and just a block from Publix Market.
That's a good location.
And another half a mile down to Winn-Dixie, but we were there first.
Yeah, Publix wouldn't have
But I'm looking back, I said we ended up in a nicer neighborhood, nicer whatever. We were up here in North Lakeland instead of the Crystal Lake area, which is a dumpy lake. It's not so crystal anymore. Because everybody's septic tank overflow goes down.
Okay. All right. Thank you for sharing that,
So-
especially the last part.
All
All right,
anyway, my
look,
bitterness dissipated.
do good to all. Do good to all. Look what he said.
Amen.
Let us not lose heart in doing good, for in due time we shall reap if we do not grow weary. So then, while we have opportunity, let us do good to all men, and especially to those who are of the household of faith. Now, again, I know every Christian here understands we have an opportunity and responsibility to support the work of the church and its various enterprises. But Paul here seems to say, well, maybe we can do good to some others as well. For example, got a few things here to ask you about. And the question is, should Christians support noble, worthy causes that may be secular? He doesn't do it anymore, but you certainly remember Jerry Lewis, don't you, in the muscular dystrophy telethon?
Yes.
Any of you ever, you can go ahead and tell, any of you ever give any money to Jerry's kids?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me see. You walk out of Sam's any day of the week and there's somebody there trying to collect money for something. The other day it was Fathers Against Drunk Driving. Or you see people wanting to, collect money for the homeless or for the mentally ill. And then you got your organizations out there like the Lions Club. Their big thing is vision issues, and so they'll collect old glasses or money for that cause. The Kiwanis, I think, for mentally challenged people. I always like to give money to the Kiwanis because they'll give you those nice Tootsie Rolls back, and so that's a good deal. The Shriners, y'all know about the Shriners, and burn units, and kids who are severely burned can go to these hospitals. St. Jude's.
St. Jude's.
There are a lot of
Cancer patients.
there are a lot of things out there. And so we could talk about Jerry's Kids, we could talk about St. Jude's Hospital, March of Dimes, Lions Club, Knights of Columbus, Shriners, many others. Just last night, Mary and I were watching a Dolly Parton telethon where she was raising money for all of those people in the Gatlinburg, Sevierville, and Pigeon Forge area that had been burned out.
Yeah,
Thousands and hundreds of thousands
yeah,
of
I saw
dollars
she was gonna do
were raised, for this. And so chances are all of us have at one point or another reached into our pocket and thrown a little money somewhere. Paul says, do good to all. Oh, yeah, we didn't even mention this time of year the bell ringers.
Somebody should-
Any of you ever dropped any money into the red kettle?
And rang the bell.
Okay.
Do it every year.
So, now, can we support every cause and good charity out there?
No.
No, but we can't.
Too many.
It'd be nice, but we can't. Paul says, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all men. Now, here's the thing. Remember in the days of the Jerry Lewis telethon, they get, for example, the chairman of the board of McDonald's to come out and say, Jerry, you're doing a great job, so proud of you. Here's a check for $5 million. Crowds go nuts. They get the chairman of Budweiser out there. Jerry, you're doing a great job preaching. Here's a check for $15 million. People go nuts. And then in Southland, 7-Eleven, they give Jerry, $10, $15 million. Richard, has Budweiser ever dropped a check on Northside Church Christ or Christian Church?
Right.
No.
You got any money from McDonald's
We
recently?
did for Five Guys.
Okay, well, they're a good
Five
place.
Guys paid
That's
for
true.
half the carpet in this building for using our parking lot.
Very nice. All right, but generally speaking, secular companies do not support the work of the church, do they? Generally speaking.
Unless they get something in return.
Unless they get something in return. So the question is, should we do good for these things? And Paul says, yes, if it's a good work. Paul says it deserves our support. Now, I think it behooves Christians to kind of know where they're giving their money and to make sure it's a good cause. If they claim to be a religious cause, I think we ought to know what they believe. And that is why I'm a big supporter of IDES, I-D-E-S. And you know what IDES is?
International Disaster Emergency Service.
Yeah, and so I've made a decision about some of our money. If I need to support a benevolent cause, a disaster aid cause, I'll give money to IDES.
They helped Sharon, didn't they?
Go ahead.
Yeah, we just delivered a $600 check from Jamaica churches to IDES for mission relief in Haiti.
Okay,
That happened about 3 weeks ago.
very good. And so IDES is a great mission.
Yeah.
And so I know we got missionaries in here, and so but one of my favorites I would say is IDES for sure. And so, but Paul says, do good to all. And so you got some change in your pocket, and there's a cause out there. They're doing a good job. Now, put it this way. Let's say that you had some vision issues and couldn't afford it. Wouldn't you be thankful that the Lions Club might be able to help you? If you had a child that was severely burned, grandchild, wouldn't you be kind of thankful there's something like the Shriners that might be able to, at no cost,
Amen.
for your child? I know I would, in any of these. And so, I can see good reason to support some of these charitable causes that are out there, can't you? And so Paul says, as you have the opportunity, let us do good to all men. And then in verse number 10, he says, but especially those who are of the household of faith. Where should a Christian's giving be primarily focused?
The church first.
The church. Glad you said that. The church first. And so, as we talk about our faithful stewardship, that needs to be on the top of our list. And then as we have opportunity, then we can help some of those other good causes that are out there. I was listening. We were listening to radio this afternoon, and the host was talking about the Dolly Parton thing last night, and she said, "Well, I gave $25, but I'd already tithed earlier." And so this was above and beyond for her.
Oh, yeah, there's a different word for them, isn't there? The tithe is first for the church and then it's gifts.
Yeah, people talk about tithes and offerings, and
Yeah.
we're not really going to get into the whole tithing thing in New Testament, but the idea is Paul says they gave themselves first to the Lord, and the Lord loves a cheerful giver, and to give bountifully and that kind of thing. And so our first and foremost giving, as you rightly say, is to the church. And then, as we have the opportunity, we can do good to all men. And so I really believe it's a biblical principle that the abundance of our financial giving should be directed to the church. And that's the Lord's work ought to be a top priority to us. And my question then is, if Christians don't support the work of the church, who will?
That's right.
That's right, nobody.
Yeah.
Nobody.
You say, the government.
That's
You know, they're big into Planned Parenthood and abortion, but they're not too big into what Northside is doing. Right? And so, you know, we're not going to...
Yard sales don't cut it. It helps, but it don't cut it.
Okay.
Bank won't support the church, but if the church doesn't make its payments, the bank will take the church building away from them.
Well, sure. Yeah. Secular causes, they see dollars and bottom line. And so, occasionally, and I'm glad Five Guys helps, but I don't...
One time.
That we can expect that that's going to be a regular thing. And any other business in town? What's that?
They changed management.
Oh, change management, that kind of stuff. And so, the application then for us is Christians support the work of the church. And then as you have opportunity, be good to everybody too. Were you going to say something, second?
I was just saying, when I was filming our first videotaping some lessons for the Getting to Know Jesus Bible study, Chick-fil-A catered our lunches during the filming process as a donation to our ministry.
Very good. And there are some very Christian-based companies still out there. And for that we're grateful. Any other thoughts, questions?
Talking about Chick-fil-A and talking about being blessed, they have stayed closed on Sundays, and yet they're either number 1 or number 2 nationwide.
Really?
in fast food
Right.
restaurants.
They outsell
They
McDonald's.
are.
They're outselling all the other fast food places, even though that they've been into
They
staying
give
closed
on
on
Sunday.
Yeah, church I was preaching at in Chesapeake, where the ladies used to do a Father's Day thing, and Chick-fil-A always gave the little card with the free sandwiches to that, and so they were church minded.
Yeah.
All right, one more Wednesday night to go, and we'll look forward to seeing you then.
Great.
Right.